I don't normally get super heated about things, but there are certain topics that just really rub me the wrong way. And there was a video that I saw recently that just set me off. And now I did do a reaction to this video on stream, but I'm not gonna lie, I was a little bit disappointed with how heated I got. But I wanna go in and break down some of the points that this content creator made about free-to-play content creators, particularly surrounding Wuthering Waves. In case you haven't seen it, there is this video from Plazookas. I will have the original video linked down below because look, we're still gonna give credit where credit is due. He uploaded the video, so I'm still gonna push people back to it. Even if I may disagree with nearly 100% of the things in this video, I still think fair is fair. But there is some ridiculous claims and accusations made in this video that I just think have to be addressed. Now, I could just address the generalization of the video, but he says some pretty egregious statements that I think need to be addressed head on. Now, to get some of my bias out of the way, of course, I am another Wuthering Waves content creator, and I do have an alt account that is free to play. So I understand there could be a little bit of bias here, but I want to load that on the front end just to be fair. But there are still some of those statements that we're going to tackle one at a time, and I'm going to show you just how ridiculous some of these statements are and why.
I think the increase in content creation over the past 5 to 10 years has seen a trend to where corporations can now leverage content creators to market their products. And they do it effectively. They do it as some friendly person inside your house that is conveying this product in a way that is very appetizing, in a way that's very pleasing. And it's kind of the new wave of sales that is sweeping the entire world. And it is done in a way that is very misleading.
So the first thing he addresses in the video is the idea of influencer marketing. And while he definitely does have a point that influencer marketing for the online and content creation space is bigger than it has ever been before, it also has not previously existed in the online content creation space. But influencer marketing has always been a thing. Whether it be Shaq, who is advertising Icy Hot, or Dennis Haybert, who is advertising Allstate, or the recent collaboration of Michael Cera and Sarah V.
Sarah V. Oh, you didn't know?
There has always been some degree of celebrity marketing on products, so to act like this is something completely unique to this space, it's not. Now, I will agree that the parasocial nature of it definitely makes it a little more unique than some of those other platforms, but it's still not something completely new like we've never seen before.
For those who play Wuthering Waves and who do it free to play, or for those who pull on the gacha and then get basically reimbursed by the companies, that is no different than people on welfare taking advantage of the system, even though they have the means to basically work or pay for all their stuff. They just want to make more money.
Now, this statement about if you do not spend money on a game that you are making content on, or if you are collecting money from a game you are making content on, is the same thing as somebody who is on welfare when they do not need to be so. Is just an absolutely absurd take that makes me so incredibly frustrated. This is somebody who can only see an exchange of value when it's in fiscal hard numbers, meaning that unless you put money into that game, you have not supported the game. That's just ridiculous. Value can also be exchanged in multiple ways, and one of those ways being marketing and advertising. If an influencer has a catered platform of a specific targeted audience, and then you pay that content creator to make content on your game to advertise it to their audience, that has a ridiculous amount of value to the company. So they're not just leeching from the company, they're exchanging a service for doing that. That is not the same thing as sucking money out of welfare. He also just set up a world that basically doesn't even exist. The points that he makes about being reimbursed by the company or being paid by the company to do pulls isn't really something that exists. This is something that has been verified by other content creators like Tectone, who's talked about that the most you would generally see in that space is in some small occasions, you would be given a stipend to pull. But rarely has it ever been that the amount that you are given as a stipend is going to cover the full amount amount of polls you're going to do on the stream anyway. And that's not even considering the fact that content creators are obligated to say when something is an ad. If you are sponsored on stream or sponsored in a video, you have to disclose that it is an advertisement. If somebody's not disclosing an advertisement, that's a completely different problem, and of course, something that somebody should not be doing. But if somebody's disclosing that as an advertisement, then there is still an exchange of service, and both parties are getting value out of it. Because remember, the stipend exists for you to pull more so that your audience gets excited about the pulls, and so they want to go play the game and pull more, thereby hopefully making the company more money.
Games do not make themselves. Free-to-play games are not cheap to make. And yet, they don't ask anything up front. When you have to go and pay $30 to see a movie or $50 to go bowling, there are games out there that are literally allowing you to come into their environment and play them. And now after playing Honkai Star Rail and games like Wuthering Waves, I have to admit, these games are complete packages, and they do not overly advertise their monetization schemes. It's there if you want to pay. It's not if you don't.
The amount that a game costs to make has no value or weight on the consumer for how much money you choose to spend on that thing. And what I mean by that is if a company chooses to either take a standard pricing model of, let's say, $80 a game versus a free-to-play model where there's opportunity to spend in the game, regardless the path the company takes does not change your moral obligation for spending money on said game, whether you choose to skip it entirely or choose not to spend on that game. And no duh that these games take a lot of money to develop. There's been some growing issues in the industry overall with how these companies are being structured and how much money and investment they're willing to put into it, because they're putting too much money into the development of these games so that they have to recoup an even greater amount of cost, which then leads to unfriendly pricing models for consumers. But I want to be clear about something when it comes to free-to-play games. Free-to-play games are not charity. It's not done in a sense so that they can just be nice and give something back to the consumer. It's so that they can make more money, ideally from the player base. Let me just show you with an example. Yeah, I've got Notepad out, just freaking deal with it. Let's say you've got a standard model of pricing for a game that's for 1,000 people, and the price for that game is $80 per game. Well, if you've got 1,000 people and they all buy this copy of this game, the company has now sold $80,000 worth. Now, we're not going to get into the additional fees and how much has been taken off for distribution or anything like that. We're just going to use flat numbers here for an example. But on the standard pricing model, they've now made $80,000. Now let's pivot over to a free-to-play model for gaming revenue per 1,000 people. Now let's be generous and let's say 60% of the player base is completely free-to-play. They don't spend a single dollar. Well, in that case, that's going to be 600 people. Maybe an additional 30%, maybe they're light spenders. Maybe they're your monthly pass holders or your battle pass buyers, and they're spending more along the lines of about $20 a month. That equates to about $6,000. Then on top of that, let's say you've got a little bit above your light spenders and your maybe average pack buyers. This is probably going to be an even smaller percentage, let's say like 8%. So about 80 people of that 1,000 are maybe buying a handful of packs, about $200 per person, making about $16,000. But I ran the numbers doing an estimation on whales, and whales in gacha gaming equate to about 2% of the average player base for any given game. Now, we've been able to see from the JP server incident that we've been able to see that people are spending about $3,000-ish on the whale side, which I would say is probably a fairly reasonable amount to average out there. So if we say that about that 2%, 20 people are spending about $3,000 each whaling on the game, that is $60,000 on that game, bringing it up to a grand total of $82,000. Now, that alone, from the same group of 1,000 people, you are still going to be making more on a free-to-play game model. But that doesn't even account for that these games operate as a live service game, meaning the majority of these numbers are going to be recurring to some degree. The people who are buying the daily and battle passes for sure are going to be. The average the pack buyers are probably going to be similar. And then the whales, at least a small percentage of them, will be coming back as well, because especially when it comes to gacha games, new patches bring new characters, creators, which brings new money into the game. So whereas the first game that's built off the standard pricing model, that is only going to be a one-time purchase where you've now created a recurring business model where you can earn exponentially more in doing that. That's why these companies do free-to-play pricing models, because while yes, it is a gamble to get people to spend, when they do, the returns can be ridiculously high. Wuthering Waves and Genshin Impact, as well as the other Hoyoverse games, are not the only games making millions of dollars a month. Other games like Nikke, Muma Usume, a lot of other gacha games are making millions of dollars a month, if not in the high hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is still way more than you would expect from a standard pricing game. So we need to stop talking about free-to-play like it's a charity or a service that's being handed out. It is a calculated business decision. So stop trying to stand on the morality of that.
This is specifically directed at content creators who play, who advertise this game, saying they're free to play, pulling on things even though they don't say they're sponsored or they're going to get reimbursed in the back end. You are deplorable. You are no different than a succubus or a hellish being that consumes everything. You are the absolute reason or the equivalent to what a big corporation does for maximizing their profits. There's no difference here.
Now, when the Bobby Kotick and Succubus line comes out, I'm not gonna lie, it really pissed me off. That was a statement that really rubbed me the wrong way, because I think it's absurd to be making that kind of equivalency of calling a content creator who's doing a free-to-play run on a game the same thing as Bobby Kotick or a gaming executive trying to milk the player base for everything they are. That can only be said by somebody who has a very narrow perception of how value can be exchanged in business, and that unless you are putting your own money in, you are not benefiting that cause. It's just legitimately ridiculous, and it's somebody who doesn't understand marketing, targeted advertising, and the platforms that many of these influencers offer. And I'm not even trying to say myself in this case, I'm just saying in general, there are a lot of content creators that have a very valuable audience that a lot of gaming companies would love to have their games placed in front of.
If your job is content creation and you're playing a game, yes, you should support it. You should not ask for anything in return, because the reason why you're playing that game is because you enjoy it, because that's all your videos. And yet I surmise that you don't enjoy it, that this is just a job. And therefore you're no different than a salesperson, and therefore you're no different than Bobby Kotick or any of the other executives that exist in these companies that are only there for profit. And I think that people need to be aware of that. I think people need to understand that. They're not your friends. Content creators are not your friends. Some of them actually are gamers that really want to play the game, that really support video games as a hobby. And some people are there just to consume for content to make money. I can't tell you what the difference is, but there are plenty of people who are covering Wuthering Waves that are of that ilk, and there's other content creators who are genuine and actually do care about video game development.
Okay, I'm gonna try really hard not to be really pissed off on this next part, but the gaming gatekeeping line is something that also really set me off. Because who is he to decide what content creators are actually enjoying playing games and making gaming content versus those just trying to exploit for money, which again, already addressing earlier, is not even fully relevant. I think it's an absolutely ridiculous claim to make, especially when you don't have the backbone to actually throw out any claims. You're gonna throw out some veiled subtweet saying, there are some content creators that I don't think are actually into it, and you only see this as a job, and that's a problem. You have the audacity to say something like that without actually following up? That's just absurd. It's a kind of moral grandstanding, because he then follows up with equating himself to being one of those real gamers, one of those real content creators that genuinely appreciates gaming. And while I think there are people who do, I think it's ridiculous to try and be the gatekeeper and authority to decide who those people are by even having the audacity to make the claim. It's just absurd. And I can't believe somebody would actually do that. He calls those content creators deplorable, and the only thing that I can see is deplorable in this video is you having the audacity to call those content creators deplorable. It's a pretty crazy example of friendly fire in content creation, about somebody just trying to cause drama out of nothing. Especially when you consider that free-to-play players exist. As we looked at in our previous numbers, there's going to be a large population of free-to-play players. Those free-to-play players love to see content on free-to-play games and on other free-to-play accounts. It's something that they enjoy consuming. They want to learn from in some cases, especially when it comes to guide makers who are making guides for free-to-play players. That it's a valuable service of infotainment in some cases, or just genuine entertainment. So why are we trying to pretend like that player base doesn't exist? And so the content that these people make is of any less value for doing so, especially when it is not double dipping because of the platform that they are providing. And also, even if they were double dipping, I don't see that as an issue anyway.
There is not a free-to-play game that I've played in the past 20 years that I have not eventually supported. Period. I never play a game completely free-to-play because I actually think it is the issue with the industry. Games are cheaper than most other hobbies, period. And most likely, games will increase in price in the next year or two, guaranteed, especially with GTA 6 on the horizon. It is going to be a milestone. It's going to be a new trend, a new wave of increase, in my opinion, whether it be base product or all their other different options.
When he starts talking about how gaming is cheaper than most other hobbies, it is the biggest red herring I've ever seen in an argument, because the cost of a hobby is completely irrelevant to the amount that you should be paying into said hobby. There is zero expectation on the participant in doing that, especially when the exchange here is something that the company has willingly entered into and chosen to take the gamble on their pricing model. There is zero moral obligation to do so. Let me reiterate too, just so we're clear here. I don't think there's anything wrong with spending money on gacha games, especially if it is something that you are spending a lot of time on and you've gotten a lot of value out of. If you want to spend money in a way to give back to the company who has created the product, that is completely fine. But also, if somebody chooses not to, I'm still not going to stand there and say, how dare you for not doing that, because it's still the gamble that the company chose to take. I personally do put a little bit of money into gacha games. I buy the daily pass, I buy the battle pass. That's all I've paid for so far. But that does not make me any more moral or important than somebody else who is elected to do a free-to-play playthrough. I also think it's ridiculous that then he equates that the free-to-play content creators are the cause for game prices going up. Like, we can look at game pricing charts for over the last decades, and games have been going up fairly consistently. And again, I think the root problem there is the amount that these companies are investing into the development of these games, so they need to make back more, so they are raising their costs. That has nothing to do with a free-to-play content creator choosing to not spend money personally and make content on free-to-play games.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm right.
No, Plazookas, you're definitely wrong. You're definitely wrong in this case. As I said before, I think this is one of the worst examples of friendly fire I've seen in content creation. To throw jabs at other free-to-play content creators for doing so, I just think is ridiculous. And I don't know why somebody would come out of the woodwork to try and start causing conflict with doing so. I just want to free any free-to-play players, free-to-play content creators, anybody who's been seeing this video circulating around, and say, just ignore it. I just think it's absolutely ridiculous, and I hope I've shown you why that is the case today. But if you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. Greatly appreciate you. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.